So there's actually 5 parts to the hair. The first part, I call it the bowl, and it is just, so you see on this, the doll that I made before, it's this part of the hair, so this part that sort of you just crochet around the head, that's what I call the bowl. So it's really straightforward to create, so it's just a normal sort of, you know, when you're doing an amigurumi pattern and you sort of do the 6, 12, 18, 24 increase type of pattern, it's just like that. So the first round is just 6 single crochets in a magic circle, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'll just talk you through the next rounds because they're really straightforward. So we're doing increase all around for round 2, which gives us 12 single crochets, and we're doing single crochet increase 6 times, so that gets us to 18, 2 single crochets increase 6 times, that gets us to 24, 3 single crochets increase 6 times, 30, 4 single crochets increase 6 times, 36, 5 single crochets increase 6 times, 42, and then single crochet all around for rounds 8 to 11, so that would be 42 single crochets for each of those rounds, and then that's the end. So then you just fasten off, leaving a long tail for sewing. So I'll just show you when I get to the end of round 11 what it looks like and how I fasten off. So I finished the final round of the bowl part, so it should just look like this. And then what we need to do is we just need to cut our yarn. Now we need to leave a really long tail this time because we're going to be sewing this all around the head, so I always prefer to leave a bit too much just rather than too little. So I'm going to cut at about this point, and then I'm just going to pull through. And there we have it, and then this is ready now to sew to the head, but I'm going to make all of the other hair parts to start with and then sew them all at once. So we'll move on to the next part now. So the next part is the fringe, so we need to start off with a foundation chain of 19, so I've just done that already. So once we have our chain 19, then we need to do 7 slip stitches along the chain that we just made. I like to do my slip stitches into this back loop here, but you can do it into whatever loop you like best. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now once you've done that, we need to chain 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then what we need to do is slip stitch along the back stitches of that chain 6 that we've just done again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we need to slip stitch into the next stitch of the original chain 19, so that would be this stitch here. And then we need to do the exact same thing again, so we need to do this 4 times in total, so I will just do that and then come back to you when I've got to that stage. So now we have finished that part, and we should have 5 of these little hair strands. So the last thing we would have done is done a slip stitch into the original chain 19. So now we're going to do 3 more slip stitches into the original chain 19. So 1, 2, 3. And now what we're going to do is the same thing again, so we're going to do 6 chains, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're going to slip stitch down all of the 6 chain, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then slip stitch into the next chain of the original chain, so like this, and then we're going to chain 6 again, slip stitch down, just repeat the same thing, and we'll end up with 5 strands on this side as well. And obviously when you get to the last chain, for the last chain 6 that you do, you'll just slip stitch down the back of that chain 6, and then that'll be the end, as obviously there's no further chain of the original chain to slip stitch into. So I will meet you once we've finished that. So now you can see that we have 5 strands on either side of this fringe piece. So I'm just going to cut my yarn. Again, we need to leave a fair amount for sewing, so I'm just going to leave a good length there just to be on the safe side. Then we can just pull through. And if you still have the little end of this, the beginning foundation chain, you could even just do a little knot here just to add some extra security to that. So that's the fringe piece complete. Obviously it looks a bit weird and misshapen at the moment, but once we pin it down and sew it to the head, it won't look like this. So that's the fringe, and now we are going to move on to the buns. So the buns are these little yellow pieces, and they're really straightforward as well, so I'm not going to show you exactly how to do it. I will just walk you through what we need to do. So we do 6 single crochets in a magic circle, then we increase all around to get us to 12, then we single crochet increase 6 times to get us to 18, and then we do 4 rounds of single crocheting all the way around, so that's 7 total rounds there, and I will ensure that you can see those instructions written down as well in my written pattern. And we just need to repeat that twice, so we end up with 2 of these bun pieces, and then also for the bun we need to make these little red circles, and again these are really straightforward. You just need to do 6 single crochets into a magic circle and then increase all the way around, and then that gets you to 12, and then I did also finish off with a fake single crochet for this piece, so that the circle doesn't have like a piece sticking up at the end, but you can again do that however you'd like to, and then eventually what we will do is sew these 2 bits together. So yeah, I will meet you once you've done 2 of each of these pieces of the hair. So I've just finished with the 2 bun pieces and the 2 red circles, so now we can just put those aside for now and we'll get back to that later. So now we just need to do the final hair piece, which is the 2 strands. So this is what one of them looks like. So it's just a long hair strand, and all we need to do for that is chain 51. So I've got my chain 51 here ready, and then we just need to single crochet into every chain along, so that should be 50 single crochets. So I'll just do a couple for you. Again, I like to go into that back loop of the chain, but you can do it however you would prefer. So just on the first 3 single crochets, and we're just going to do the same all the way across and then leave a long tail for sewing. So now that we have the 2 strands complete and we've done all of the hair pieces, we're going to start assembling these and sewing them to the head. So the first thing that I've done is pinned in place the bowl piece onto the head, ready for me to sew it. Now, 2 tips I'd give you when positioning this is, firstly, you need to make sure that there is enough space between the eyes and the bowl piece in order for you to be able to sew the fringe down without it touching the eyes. So that looks like just enough space for me, so I'm happy that that's a good place to sew it down. And then secondly, my second piece of advice is to make sure that the end is placed at the back of the head, because it may look ever so slightly uneven here if you didn't finish it off with a fake single crochet, which I didn't. So it's best to put the neatest part at the front, because that would be the most visible part. So now we just need to start sewing around. So I like to use a whip stitch, but you can choose whichever stitch you would like. So I'm just going to put this on my yarn needle, and you can sort of sew round in whichever direction you like as well. I am going to sew round, so I'm going to start in this stitch. So I'm going to just select any of the pink stitches here that I think is about right, so this one, and pull through like that, and then I'm going to go into the next stitch, choose a pink stitch, pull through, next one, choose a pink stitch, and I'm going to just go like that all the way around, trying to make the sewing as even as possible on both sides, and then once I've done that I will show you how to do the rest of the hair. So I've just finished sewing that all the way around, as you can see, and I'll just show you how I finish off, just in case you want to see, and in case I forget to show you for any of the other parts, because I do basically the same thing on all of them. So I will just put my needle back through, select any of the yellow stitches to poke back through, so this one for example, pull through, and then cut the yarn close to the surface, and then if there's any bits sticking up, just kind of poke it back in, and then that's it, and then you can't tell where I put that in. So yep, that's the end of the bowl piece. Now we can move on to sewing together the buns. So the first step is just to pin the red circle to the centre of one of the buns. Again, I would recommend that you do this on the opposite side to the tail, because this will be the neater side. And then all we need to do is, similarly to what we just did on the bowl piece, we just whip stitch all the way around. So I'll show you a few stitches. So one, two, and you'll probably notice that I'm just going through one loop when I'm sewing this. Again, completely up to you how you want to do this. So one more I'll do. And yeah, you just do that all the way around for both of the bun pieces, and then they're ready to sew to the head. Now we've got the 2 buns ready to pin and sew to the top of the head, so I'm just going to do one to start with. So we've got our head here. They should be just sort of on either side, kind of like this. So just pick a position that you're happy with, have a little look at it, and see if you're happy, and then if you are, just pin it down as best you can. Like that. so I'm happy with that position. So what we need to do is again just whip stitch all the way around, exactly the same as we have been doing for the other components of the hair. So I'll just start at the back here. Again, just select any of these yellow stitches that's around the hair, pull through, next one, and so on again all the way around until you've reached the end. And just one important point to note as well, it depends on what type of yarn you've used in terms of whether you need to stuff the buns. So I stuff them anyway, even though this yarn is quite stiff and seems to stand up by itself, but particularly if you're using a softer yarn that maybe doesn't quite stand up by itself, you might want to add a bit of stuffing when you're nearly all the way around sewing the bun. So yeah, we'll just do that on both sides, and then we will attach the strands. So I finished sewing the buns, as you can see. So now the next part is just to sew these strands. This is quite straightforward. So just take one of your strands, turn the doll to the side, get a pin, and just pin wherever you feel looks best. So I think it's usually best to put it sort of at the bottom towards kind of the back as well of one of the buns, so it sort of flows down like this. So that's where I will sew it. Again, I'll just do the same thing. I'll do a few whip stitches probably around this area. I won't sew the whole thing down, and I will just show you me doing one of these. So you could use either strand, doesn't really matter which one you use. So just go in like that, do another one, then go back through to the other side. And then just sew a couple of stitches on this side. You don't need to be very strict with how you do your stitches. You can just sort of do them however you want. This bit won't be very visible from the front. So I'll just do one more here. And then I might just go back up into this part and just do one more stitch, and then I think that's fine. So then I'm just going to do the same thing I would normally do, so just through any stitch, do the same with this bit. Then snip. And then if you see here, that's now attached, and there's that hair strand there, and then we just need to do the exact same thing on the other side, and then we can finally attach the fringe. Now I've attached the two strands to the head, so the last bit of the hair to do is the fringe. So we need to get the fringe piece and do our best to kind of pin it in place so that this sort of gap in the middle, it sits in the middle of the forehead. So I'm just going to do that and I'll show you once I've done that. Now I've roughly pinned the fringe in place. The main thing that we need to remember here is we need to kind of leave a circle in the middle of these two pieces, so they need to kind of sit like that. So you need to try and pin them down as best you can. It is a little bit fiddly, but yeah, I'm just going to try and do that now. So yeah, those pieces will sit kind of like that, and then the rest of the fringe will kind of sort of follow on from that kind of positioning. So the first thing to do is to start sewing the main part of the fringe down, so this part, and then we'll sew these strands. So I'll just show you how I'm doing this. So again, I'm going to use a whip stitch, so I'm just going to go in here, the next one, and so on across the whole fringe. So I've now sewn the fringe across the edge like this. So now we need to sew the fringe strands down. So I'm actually going to start with the ones in the middle because it makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to take my yarn and push it through to somewhere in the middle, like so. And then I'm just going to start to sew the hair strand down. Again, I think for this part, I'm just having a look at how I did it on the original. Yeah, I'm not actually going to use a whip stitch. I'm going to do a normal sort of stitch, so you'll see what I mean. So go through like this, and then instead of going into a pink stitch and then pulling through a yellow stitch, we'll go from the yellow stitch back into a pink stitch. And then pink stitch into a yellow. And then we will sew around the other edge. So and I think that'll probably do. So I don't know how helpful that was because sewing is not my favourite part, so I just kind of do whatever I think looks best. I kind of just wing it as I go along. But that will be the end of this first strand, and then I think the way that I did it before was just to sew down these 4 strands next, and then I will push my yarn through to this back to the middle, and then sew this strand down, and then do the other 4 strands next to it. So I'll just show you how I do one of these next strands. So I kind of do it right next to it. And what I like to do actually is just leave a little bit at the end that I don't sew down, because then otherwise if you sew that down it can kind of make all of the strands look like one massive piece. So if you just leave a few stitches that you don't work, and then you just kind of sew each strand to each other, and then come back through the middle and we'll work on the other side, and I'll show you what this looks like when I've got to that point. So I've sewn down this side of the fringe, and now I'm going to do this side, so I'm basically just going to do the same thing again. So yep, I think that'll probably do. So now I'm just going to again sew down all of the remaining strands, leaving a little bit at the end, and just being a bit more secure with the last piece there, sewing that down a bit more flat than the rest of them. And then once I finish that, then we can move on to crocheting the remaining parts of the doll, which will be for the body and the skirt as well. And what we also might do is at this point, because the head has gotten quite heavy, you'll notice that the neck is flopping a bit, so we can go back in with the pink yarn and reinforce the neck. So yeah, just sew down the fringe and then we will move on to the next part. So now that the fringe is sewn down, I'm going to reinforce the neck as I mentioned before. So this is an optional step. If you don't mind it being floppy like this, then you can just leave it, but I'd rather the neck be a bit more secure. So all I have done is just cut a length of the light pink yarn, quite a long length again, just to be on the safe side, and I've just thread that through my needle, and all I'm going to do is just put my needle through any one of these pink stitches here and then back up through a neck stitch. I'm going to leave a fairly long length of yarn still coming out of the back there so that we can sort of feed that through again and hopefully secure that end when we finish with the sewing. So all I'm going to do is just whip stitch around, so I'm going to pick any stitch, oops, sorry, pull through, and then I'm going to do the same thing in the next stitch. Then the next stitch, trying to do it as evenly and neatly as possible. And I'm just going to do that all the way around 1 or 2 times. I'll let you know how many times I end up doing it, and that should hopefully make the neck a lot more stable, and I'll show you that. So I've gone around the neck twice now, and as you can see it's still a little bit floppy, but it's not as bad as it was before. You could even do a third time, but I didn't want to completely lose the definition of the neck. So now all I'm going to do is just weave in the ends. So I'm just going to go back through a stitch. I'm going to go into one of these white stitches. I'm going to go back through, feed it to the bottom here, and I'm going to do the same with this end as well. And then I'm just going to cut. And that is how I've reinforced the neck. So then, yeah, the next part is to start sewing the arms, so I'm going to show you how to do that.